Thank you very much, and welcome to the Printers Row Lit Fest. We're delighted to have this opportunity to talk with you about a particularly interesting idea, the idea of the biography not of a person, but of a book. And helping us to parse through that idea is the recent author of just such a biography, Dr. Marty, who is Professor Emeritus of History at the Religious History at the University of Chicago, as many of you already well know. And he has written a biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Letters and Papers from Prison. It's one of 3 books that's kicking off a series of such books from Princeton University Press. And to start our discussion, I want to read the press's description of what they're trying to do and then ask Dr. Marty to comment on it. They say that this new series, recounting the complex and fascinating histories of important religious texts written for general readers by leading authors and experts, is intended to trace how their reception, interpretation, and influence have changed over time, often radically. As these stories remind us, all great religious books are living things whose careers in the world can take the most unexpected turns. Now, Dr. Marty, you've also recently completed and published a biography of Martin Luther, a Lutheran who somewhat predated Dietrich Bonhoeffer. What's the difference between writing a biography of a figure like Luther and a book like Bonhoeffer's?
There are far more similarities than I thought I would find. When Princeton University Press described this series and asked if I would be one of the co-kickers off of it, it took me about 5 minutes to sign a contract because it was an utterly new challenge. I didn't know anything like this. I didn't know anyone who had tried it. The first thing, though, you have to do if you're writing a biography of the book is forget about biological analogies. That is, you don't want to say the book was born this way and went through adolescence and all those things. They don't do that. But they have careers, and they change in the light of the passage of time. Think of almost any book you read 20, 30 years ago and think of its reputation now. Think of the Vonnegut books and the books that were big in the 60s and 70s, if you're old enough to have been around then. They're very different books now. Malcolm Muggeridge, Herbert Marcuse, Marshall McLuhan. I'm into M's today. Cultural superstars then, and they don't show up now. So that's, I think, the first thing. The other thing is biography of a person. You dig into letters, you dig into reminiscences, and so on. Here you have mainly a narrative of where it's gone, what's happened to it along the way. And it was such a delightful concept that when I met the other authors, and why don't you just tell them a little bit about who some of these authors are or what they're going to write about, because that gives you a little sense of where you can take this, the diversity of what's going on.
So the other 2 books that have already been published in this series, one is a biography of Augustine's Confessions by Gary Wills, who has, of course, written about Augustine several times during his career. And then this is a biography of the Tibetan Book of the Dead by Donald Lopez, who's up at the University of Michigan. Each of them treats this idea each of the 3 in a different way, and some of the books that are still to come in this series also promise to be very interesting. Vanessa Oakes is writing about the Haggadah. Bruce Chilton, who many of you may have heard of, is writing a biography of the Book of Revelation. So just think about that for a minute.
If he finishes it in a hurry.
Yeah, right. I think October 20th is the deadline. The Bhagavad Gita, the Dead Sea Scrolls. You did try to avoid those anthropomorphic moments. But I thought one thing you said that was quite important was to think about not just the physical object, but its soul, the book's soul. So in thinking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and what he left post-war theology, what is this? When you were thinking about the soul of his letters and papers, how did you come to assess that in terms of its effect on its readers?
Aristotle and Leon Cass and I define soul this way.
That's a good threesome.
Soul is the integrated vital power of any organic body, so long as it is open to possibility and opportunity and so on. A corpse has the same corpuscles that the hand did, but it can't do anything anymore. What's missing? Soul. And I think that's what I look for in Bonhoeffer. For those of you who haven't done a lot with Bonhoeffer, I'll just say a few little things about him. But first thing that strikes me is he lived as long as Martin Luther King. When I'm on campuses and we're often senior generation around, I'll often ask them, name 4 people in the spiritual field that made living in the 20th century worthwhile. Well, you'll hear Mother Teresa, you'll hear Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, and Bonhoeffer. They tend to be the top 4 on the lists that my part of the world will say. And he lived to be 39, and the last 3 years were in prison. So basically, he lived to be 36 plus the little book I wrote about. This is the newest edition of the book I wrote about. This is the one you might want to buy because it's affordable and carryable, and this one's cost $80. But it's a 16-volume series of somebody whose writing basically stops at age 36. And meanwhile, he was active in underground activities. He was in double agent in the CIA of Germany, if you want to call it that. He spent a year in America. He went to Barcelona. He had a church in London. All these things are crammed in there. And my search for his soul was what held him together. It's obvious that as a Christian, he was an ordained minister. You naturally look for where the resources of that faith were. And I find that he's held together by promise. The last thing he said as they led him to the gallows was, "This is the end, but for me it's the beginning." And you can read that a lot of ways. You can take a traditional doctrine of the resurrection. You can take it somebody who's fulfilled all he can in his life, and yet he can foresee what's going to happen because everything was unfinished at that time. So I think that was where I most saw his soul.
One reason, of course, that we write biographies of anyone or anything is that we believe that the impact that that person has had on others has been in some way transformative. A biography of Washington, a biography of Lincoln, think of any of those. And so, of necessity, a biography of a book is about the impact that it has had on its readers and the uses to which they've put that. And so, particular of interest to me as I was reading your biography of the letters and papers was to think of the different kinds of people that it changed. You want to and they are not at all similar in many ways, which is fascinating too. Can you speak to that?
The book has been translated into 34 languages. I could buy it in Bogota. I bought it in Cape Town. You can buy it anywhere in the world. It's all the languages, so it obviously travels. People read it, things happen. Its first round happened to young people who were thinking of vocation. Some of them went into religious vocations, but others steered their life in the light of it. That's not the central use today, but just a variety of some of these impacts. The first, I brought a couple samples along. The first big book about him gives you a sample of what it goes to. Von der Kirche zur Welt by Manfred Müller, who was an East German communist theologian. That sounds very contradictory, but the Stalinists were running East Germany. In fact, the very town where Bonhoeffer went to school and studied was one of these headquarters. They allowed a few universities and a few theological faculties the Humboldt University, which is still a